What's up, everybody? We are here on day 3 of the Ruby Franke, Jody Hildebrandt, and Kevin Franke details released, jail calls, interviews, journal entries, horrible facts of the crimes they committed and have been sentenced and pled guilty to, at least 2 out of the 3. We watched one of the Kevin Franke videos, and you guys were adamant. You wanted to listen to the second interview. There's no video. We're just going to play the audio and some of the cleaner audio. A bunch of people sent me a bunch of different audios. Hidden True Crime is a small true crime. I shouldn't say small, is a medium-sized true crime channel. I always think of my channel as small still, so I know people don't, and people work really hard to build their channels up. So shout to them. Go give the video a like and stuff on their page. We're going to listen to the audio here. It's pretty clean from theirs. And we're going to listen to that interview. And then we're also going to listen to more of the jail calls by Ruby Franke. About 5 or 10 minutes of jail calls from another link from Law and Crime that I hadn't heard in the last ones. That is really, really interesting about what's next, what it's going to be like. So stick around for the end of the video when we break down some more jail calls from Ruby Franke. But the majority of the video is going to be, in fact, on Kevin Franke's second interview. So make sure you guys hit the like button if you requested this, or one of the 5,000 plus that hit the like button on the last video. A lot of people were like, we're not going to get there. We got there. I knew we would. I knew you guys would want to if you wanted to hear this content, because that's how all of the content decisions are made on this channel, is based on what you guys want to listen to, what you want to hear, what you want to break down. So that's why we're watching and listening to this second interview by Kevin Franke. And oh boy, is this a wild ride? Is this a roller coaster? And oh boy, did he change his tune from that first interview. It is almost like they're interviewing a different person here when he comes, and it's like he's had some kind of clarity as well, like Ruby Franke seemed to have had in the change and her jail calls. So that's something that they share in common. But let's take a listen to this together. Here we go.
Were you there the first? I was there. I don't think I interviewed with you. Okay.
Lieutenant Dudley was with me the first time.
I don't remember a lot.
Yeah, I don't blame you. A lot all at once.
Usually a long time to see.
By the way, I've boosted the audio, but I am now going to drop my microphone audio down. John will let me know how it all sounds. I've dropped it down to not blow out anybody's eardrum. So hopefully the sound is balanced now. And thank you, Susan, for gifting 5 memberships. We had a really fun members only live last night with Whitney, my wife, who came on. So to all the new members, go check that out if you guys weren't able to make it live.
It's a good thing we're dealing with. Yeah, but I know that both of my kids have mentioned both of you my names, and particularly with you. And good kid. Do you guys by chance have a card?
I do in the car,
Okay.
but not
Okay.
on. So I'll grab that for you then.
Okay.
So like I talked to Mr. Kester about, I just want this to be totally ran by you. I won't ask you any questions that are incriminating. We're not looking at you as a suspect or anything like that. We just are more curious of the dynamic and Jody coming into your relationship, your lives.
They are not looking at him as a suspect, and it seems like that hasn't changed. We'll see if you guys think that's the right decision by law enforcement, but that is something that really hasn't changed from the jump.
So if you kind of just want to walk us through that on how she came into your lives and then where things started to
Jody, you mean?
Or
Jody.
Jody.
I said Julie, but
oh
Jody.
Jody. Yeah, Jody. Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. I'll ask first. Have you found the pen papers?
The pen papers. So we found quite a bit of different.
So he specifically asks about these pen papers, which a lot of you guys told me is basically where Jody would write down things that would end up in the Bible, which again, so many red flags and telltale signs of issues. My wife is watching that Nickelodeon show. I can't remember what it's called. I watched an episode with her last night with Drake Bell, and it's like, when you see red flags that are major red flags and major issues, take them seriously, especially when everybody else in your life and your family that you've trusted and known your whole life is telling you to take a look at what's going on.
We believe they're on the computer, and the rest of them are sealed, like they're trying to mail them off. But we do not have a direct copy of it, no.
Because my understanding was we had purchased as a Christmas present for Jody in 2021 a leather folder that 3 inches thick or whatever, and it had engraved on the leather on the outside the pen papers, and Ruby wrote detailed notes of everything, all interactions with Jody and Pam Botcher from August 2021 until, I don't know when. But,
You're saying something like a satchel looking leather fit, or is it more like a binder?
no, it's like, I don't know what they call it. But
It's flat.
well, yeah, so you
Just like
see,
a short, because we do have Ruby's journal, which is from those dates that you
these,
mentioned.
these
About this
things
big?
are going to be so, she wouldn't write, the stuff she wrote in the pen paper, she would not write in her journal. The stuff she wrote in the pen papers was not intended to be read by anybody until God would decree them to be written as scripture for the whole world to read.
I
And
believe
that's what the pen papers are that people are asking, what are they? It's things that have been revealed to her that God would eventually put in the scriptures. In transit, there's no video of this, just audio. So we're listening to the interview together, and you get to see me stare off into the distance as we listen.
that's what we
We have that.
have. Because you're saying the pen would be different, correct? Like a,
Well, it was just in a thing called the pen papers. So it was, and that's how Ruby referred to those papers. So it described all of the visions and trances and everything that Jody and Ruby went into.
How thick would you say it was?
It was like 3 inches thick or so. And there were hundreds of pages of written documents that Ruby had. And that was given to Jody in 2022.
And again, I felt like some of those journal entries read like something that were going to be used for a book or something later, which makes sense that they had all these plans of they write all this stuff and this is how they gain their clout and power. It really felt like that when you read it.
When she left and returned to her home in January. So
This is similar.
yeah, like it would look like that.
Okay.
that's not the journal that we have, so,
I think it looks like a satchel.
It's something Jody would not want found,
yeah.
but she wouldn't want to destroy it.
Because we didn't find that in the home.
It's an empty one.
We just find an empty one.
I
So,
remember saying, empty thing that, the full thing. But it was-
If the empty one says the pen paper's on the outside of it, then they emptied it.
I don't remember.
we'll go back through our photos and see if that's, because everything in the home was photographed.
If you're interested in Pam Botcher, that's going to tie Pam Botcher to all of this, what's in those documents. Okay, so,
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yes, it's just audio.
Okay, let me see if I can find it.
Thank you.
in 2018, we were
And again, a lot of things go mute when they talk about the minors or there's something in there that's confidential or something that they can't get into. That's why it'll go mute just kind of in the middle. So we'll skip through some of the muted parts.
Ruby had a very close friend named Paige Hanna, who lives in Mapleton, who was a massive fan of Connections and Jody Hildebrand. In fact, the Hannas are on the cover of their book. If you've probably seen them. And so Ruby started to speak with Jody towards the end of 2018, early 2019, with the intention of having her be the therapist to Jody. Jody always had a larger interest in communicating with the parents more than with the actual patient, which I always found curious. But her theory was, if you want to help your child, you have to help yourself first, and then you'll know how to help the child. So she spoke with Ruby frequently, and the frequency of their communications ramped up. And then the first conversation that Jody had with Chad.
She liked to talk to the parents more than the kids that were the ones actually getting her treatment. And to me, that's not abnormal. A lot of manipulation and cult leaders, you want the people of influence and they'll influence the other people. And if you can get them on board, then you've got everybody locked in.
That was in June of 2019 while we were on a trip to the East Coast. All of her visits were virtual through Zoom.
And it's also important to note that for potentially Ruby to get a better, lesser sentence with the parole board and all this stuff going on, the fact that she ended up pleading guilty and said she would testify against Jody. When we think about it in that light, right? When we're talking about the criminal case, because that's how we're focused on here, the legal end of it, right? Not necessarily the drama end of it, but the legal end of it. And when this interview is taking place, Kevin Franke probably knows what he is going to say and do could help or hurt his wife, Ruby, who it seems like, even though the divorce and all that stuff is happening, it seems like he's kind of been behind her and with her throughout most of this process and wanting to get her back. So if he's going to say this stuff as well, I think we have to also keep, scrutinize it in the way that he wants to also testify and have his words to be used against Jody Hildebrand as well, and to help Ruby Franke.
but she would talk with Ruby on the phone or through Zoom quite frequently. So Jody met with. Things got really. It got strange around the fall of 2020. The Hannahs were trying to convince and bring Ruby into. Thank you. Thanks. Into this organization called Connections, and that particularly were focused on things like lust versus love and healthy marriages, happier relationships. She invited me to go to it was like a conference or something held at Thanksgiving Point in Lehigh. There were like 100 people there, and that was in the fall of 2019, maybe late summer of 2019, late summer 2019. And my impression at that time was this is absolute craziness. This is a bunch of man-hating women that are just looking for excuses to tear down their husbands, and I mean that's what it felt like to me when I was in there. But it was confusing because there were people that I respected a lot that were up on the stage with microphones in hand, giving testimonials of how great this was and how it changed their lives and their marriage.
So again, he talks about how it's man-eating. We've heard from some other men that have been through this process in this program, again, to gain the power and influence. Nina said, I think a huge part of this case was religious beliefs. I agree. Demons, evil, dehumanizing the children. LDS Church is a huge influence, and we don't talk about that. Peter, you're religious too, but WTF. So again, one of the reasons we don't throw blanket overarching themes on entire sects of people or even religion is there can be bad people in every religion and that are non-religious or atheistic or whatever it may be. And they can twist things and use things and manipulate, and bad people are not all put into one box, right? And to be warped. And I don't want to apply that to everybody that may have a similar label or look the same as somebody else. We don't necessarily know how they believe or would act. I am very religious too, and I don't condone or would never do any of this stuff. This seems absolutely wild, insane, uh, unbiblical in any book that I have ever read or studied on it. And it just doesn't make any sense to me, which again, just to say somebody's religious is not to say that they would ever agree with this. So I'm not going to apply that to everybody that's in the LDS church or religious generally, or even not religious. I think morality will definitely show that everything that they did to these kids was horribly wrong. But I think what we're learning is a lot of this had to do with power, influence, and money. And the tides were starting to turn on Jody, legally speaking, when Ruby flipped on her. And now Kevin is testifying against her after just in the last interview saying she's trustworthy, she's a good person, and he trusts her. Amy said, I believe Kevin. Am I the only one? I absolutely believe parts of this. I think that it's kind of a mix of he was brainwashed a little bit. I think that he is having difficulty coming to grips with what the truth is, and he was really trying to get his wife back and his kids back and his family back. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult for him, I think. So I think there are definitely parts I believe. There are other parts I'm a little skeptical about, but we'll keep listening.
Like the Hannahs were among them, and so yeah, it was confusing. Ruby, then we went on a trip with the Hannahs to the UK in October of 2019, and I swear the whole objective of the trip was to convince me to get into Connections because all of them were in it except me, but they made some really eloquent arguments, and I agreed to join a men's group with Jody in January of 2020, and I would do it for 3 months. So I started that men's group in 2020, and the group, I don't know if you've ever been to an addiction recovery group, and that's what it was. That's what it felt like. I mean, there were probably 10 men in there. It was on Zoom. All of them were working through various stages of sex addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, and it was just it was like a 12-step group, but intended just for general addiction recovery. And I really was like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. But everyone's like, no, come here. You can learn to have a better life and a better marriage. And so I thought, okay, whatever. I went through my obligatory 3 months, and I was ready to leave. And then I got challenged to. And then I got challenged to sit down and have a vulnerable conversation with my wife and ask her how my lustful choices have affected her. And to me that was a loaded question. I thought, I still didn't see what I'd done or anything that would constitute any form of abuse or anything like that. And But I did. I took the challenge and I sat down, and for 2 hours, Ruby very emotionally just shared how she felt in our marriage and how.
So again, he's taking these steps, he's joining these groups, he's trying to do things to get Ruby back. Belinda said so many of these cases seem connected to the LDS. I agree, and you can't turn a blind eye to that. And I think that that's an indication of, again, testing what you think and believe and do and how you live. Jody is a monster manipulator. I was forced to see her at age 17, now 35. Her therapy, what she did over the next year was there are no words to describe. She caused me so much unnecessary lasting pain. She is evil. I'm horribly sorry to hear that. That is absolutely miserable. That is not the first time we've heard things like this. There are multiple people with very similar reactions and explanations when they saw the light to how Jody was acting and what she was doing. And she is absolutely a master manipulator. And just wait until we hear Ruby Franke's phone calls later to where the switch flipped in her brain, which is exactly what we were talking about seemingly happened in the prior videos. I know some people don't believe her either, but to me, it tracks with what she says in some of these jail calls we're going to listen to at the end of the video today.
The things that I, over 20 years of marriage, asking for sex as a husband frequently, or asking her to wear lingerie, or things like that, how that made her feel. And it was really emotional, and it touched me. Like, I didn't realize that she felt so strongly about that she felt so hurt by that. And so I committed that I would really give it a go. And I stayed in the men's group. And so, in that men's group, I met with Jody every week, with the other men that were in the group. And it got weird because our marriage felt like it was getting better and stronger. So this was now, summer and fall of 2020. And in addition to that, there was the whole YouTube cancel thing. I don't know how much you guys are even interested or aware of that, but in May of 2020, some videos that Ruby released on that dealt with Chad just blew up in her face, and it was all over the news, and hundreds of thousands of TikTokers and all this stuff were just piling on and basically burned down like our YouTube channel. Overnight, like the income went, we lost 90% of the income overnight, and that was hard.
Was this like which episode was this? Is this one where you talked about the big bag? Or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they started going back and trying to dig and find, and then they find their little nuggets like, oh, look, he went to school without a lunch one day, or stuff like that. But it was the big bag video that really set people off, and they go back from there. Mm-hmm. So at that time, Ruby.
So a lot of people are asking, do I think Kevin's going to end up with the kids? Do I think Kevin should get custody of the kids? I don't know is the answer, but I think that, this video and some other things that happened in 8 Passengers could be used against him in that custody battle. The fact that he did leave them for over a year and not speak to them, I don't think is going to play in his favor. The fact that he was absentee and not even asking questions about them, making sure their well-being, that they were okay or taken care of. But what is the best option for the kids? That's why I'm not going to sit here and say absolutely not or absolutely he has to. I hope the court and the lawyers and everybody involved does what is best for the kids after a thorough investigation and looking at every possible avenue. Kurt said, Kevin sounds broken. It's a cautionary tale. It absolutely is. I mean, I would be willing to bet, Kurt, and you can disagree with me, I don't think you will, that there were plenty of people that were commending him for being passive and not being, overly masculine, forcing his way into his family and letting his wife take control and letting Jody, lead the way into their healing for the problems that they had. I'm sure that was going on at the time. Nobody's going to admit it now. But there is a reason you need to fight certain things, regardless of what the culture says, regardless of what the norm is, regardless of what your little bubble says sometimes, right? Because sometimes you can just say, whoa, 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 this has gone too far. And with Kevin Franke, it absolutely went too far. Brenda said, your husband asking you to wear lingerie is abusive. Again, I think what this goes to, and listen, what people talk about and do in their marriage is their private life and is their prerogative. And I encourage, people to have a loving marriage where they understand each other and, they care about each other. They're not selfish with each other. They want to make the other person happy. But this is a perfect example of using something that is seemingly totally fine and appropriate. You should be asking your wife these questions and not other people, and not stepping out for somebody that may, right? I think this is the appropriate way to do it if it's something that you want to talk about it with your wife. But to take something like that, turn it into abuse, turn it into control, turn it into manipulation, that is I think, a microcosm of what Jody Hildebrandt did to a lot of men and a lot of families. Amelia, why did they lose their YouTube channel? Well, he's saying it's based on this video where their son um, was forced to sleep on a sleeping bag for 9 months and couldn't sleep in his bed, and they got accused of child abuse and basically lost the channel and 90% of their income.
He was really distraught, and she was looking for support. She was looking for someone who would understand her, who would validate her, and she found that in Jody. Jody, all the stuff she did with Chad was because of Jody, and so it makes sense that she would go to Jody, for emotional support when she felt like her world was burning down. In the meantime, I felt like our marriage was getting stronger. It felt better. Like we didn't fight as much. Even though we were having less sex, it felt more connecting, and it was just, I thought, wow, this is great. Like, this is great. And I was happy to be the guy up on the stage. That started sometime in like late 2020, or the fall of 2020. There'd be a conference, and Ruby would say, I thought we were just attending it, but then she'd say, hey, they wanted us to get up and tell our story, and I'm like, oh, okay, sure. So I get up and just say, like, yeah, I was the guy who said, I think this is a bunch of like, man-hating, women, but it really has made a difference in my marriage, and it really did. Like, I believed it. And so those conferences and stuff, everything continued like that until March of 2021, when after a conference, a connections conference down in St. George, all the inner circle, all the people who were being trained as mental fitness coaches and stuff. So that was Ruby and a bunch of other people and their spouses. We went out to like a dinner afterwards, and that's where Jody really opened up to the women in a private conversation that she believed she was being tormented and haunted by shadow figures every night, and that was spooky, and
So again,
I
a lot
don't
of
know.
people ask, why would she do this? Is it true? Maybe. Is she making it up? Maybe. Why would she make it up? A lot of people discuss situations like this where they are experiencing something nobody else is. It's a higher power. You couldn't understand the manipulation. That type of stuff is really normal in these situations, actually.
Know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. All I know is at some point, within a couple days of that, in that month of March, the Hannahs drove down from Mapleton and picked Jody up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, like, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into, so they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently. And
They refer to it as a cult at the time.
oh no, no one in a cult says I'm in a cult. Right?
Nobody in a cult says they're in a cult or knows they're in a cult. But he's like, now looking back on it, they wanted to merge their two cults.
That's one. But from your perspective, it looks like two cult leaders merging together.
From where I stand now, absolutely. According to Jody, she was held against her will for 6 weeks and was kidnapped, and she escaped and got out. According to the Hannahs, after 6 weeks of Jody stabbing herself with forks and knives, cutting herself, and wanting to commit suicide and trying to seduce the husband of the family, they kicked her out. I don't know what's the truth record.
She was trying to seduce the husband of that family that was, merging cults with her and supporting Jody and all this stuff. Very wild. Wild accusations, again, that only make sense if somebody's really struggling mentally.
Maybe a little bit of both, I don't know. But the point is, somewhere around mid-April, Jody was back in her home in Ivans, and she was a hot mess. And she reached out to Ruby for help. And Ruby was always jealous of the Hannahs, that they had a better relationship with Jody than she did. Ruby, and this is like goes back to her childhood. She wanted to be the best friend. She wanted to be the most liked. She wanted to be the one that everybody knew. And so it hurt her that she felt like she was being excluded from what was going on at the Hannah's house. And she'd say, why so many secrets? And the Hannahs would say, it's not secret, it's sacred. And when the time's right, you can know too.
It's not secret, it's sacred. And when the time's right, you can know too. It's like the power and the manipulation, it just bleeds through this.
So we went down to Jody's house in May of 2021. That was the first time I'd ever been there. And it blew my mind. I'm sure you have walked in there and gone, how does a therapist look like this? Like, it didn't make sense to me. But we were there, and she opened up and talked about, her struggles and what was going on. And I gotta say, like, I'm a smart guy. I'm an engineer. I've designed and helped build some really big stuff. I've been a college professor. I can't explain some of the stuff that happened while we were there, like crashes in the basement while we were talking upstairs, and plates like in the kitchen just flying off by themselves, like full speed, smashing on the wall and falling to the floor like, by themselves. I can't explain it, but I saw it with my.
Now he's talking about stuff happening that's unexplainable, supernatural, whatever you want to say. I have no idea, right? If we're not there, we can all say, I don't think it happened. It sounds weird. It sounds like maybe he's dealing with some stuff as well. Maybe this is part of the cult, part of the brainwashing, whatever it is. Patty makes a good point. It's so important to say this has zero to do with God. The word religion is a cop out for evil behavior, power, and financial gain. Too many child victims. People use good things to do bad all the time. And people use appropriate things, or too much of a good thing, they know, they say, can turn into a bad thing. And I think a lot of that has to do with just, it's a way they see that people are vulnerable. People are willing to open up and trust. They take it, they use it, they manipulate it. And usually it's for their financial or gain of power. Jaded, how many years can she face max? 30 years. Each of them can face 30 years max.
My own eyes, and I don't have any way to explain it other than there's some crazy shit going on. Ruby was convinced that we could intervene and help Jody. I didn't want anything to do with it. I tried to. I get the bishop involved.
There were parts of their relationship, which I found this interesting as well. There were parts of their relationship where Ruby and Kevin, were helping Jody get through this stuff, which I thought was kind of interesting and weird. It's like, if you're really brainwashed, somebody kind of forcing you to be in this and they're the cult leader, I don't think that these roles would be reversed like that. So it does make me think, exactly what's going on here and who was leading who and who was helping who.
And say, hey, go to like the priesthood and the church and all that stuff. Just go to your support network. But Ruby continued to be like, no, we can help. Like, she doesn't want that. Could you imagine like what would happen to her reputation if this got out and stuff? Let's help her. So we went down like a couple more times between May and August, but it reached the point where in August, her bishop at the time, a guy named, who's down there, a guy named Scott Galbraith. He's not our bishop anymore, but I mean, he was going over there like every night, and he'd be there for like 4 hours, and he'd be like, I'm fighting evil spirits, I'm casting demons out, I'm crazy stuff going on, and finally he got to the point where he's like, I can't do this anymore. Like, there needs to be some sort of resolution. It was at that point that they said, why don't you take her up to your house? And I was like, oh, hell no, I don't want it.
So, Mary, this is a great question. Yeah. I mean, at this point, they obviously care about her. And I think part of it has to do with, at least part of it has to do with their own selfish motivations. They're about to kind of start a business with her or do connections or give over the YouTube channel or the audience or whatever to her. So they don't want to ruin her reputation because they want to profit off her reputation. And, maybe Ruby and maybe even Kevin at some point think that she is helping their relationship. So they don't want her to just fall off her rocker dealing with, this issue that she has going on right now that they're going to help her with.
This in my house, but I was beaten over the head with it. Like, that's really insensitive. She's done so much to help our family, and you're being selfish, and she has needs, and come on, like, it won't be for long. And so I relented, and I was like, okay, actually, this could kind of be fun. Let's just make it fun, and we'll, like, she needs a vacation, so we'll just go take drives up the canyon and stuff like that. And it turned into just a crazy house. The moment she showed up in my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and like sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and like stuff floating around, and it was weird, and I hated it.
Really sounded weird.
And I became the resident exorcist. That was the title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of funny, but it was my job to like go and give her blessings whenever she started to like go into a trance and go into possession.
So he became the resident exorcist. And again, even him talking about it right now sounds weird. So like there's stuff where it's like, how far out of this world is he really, in September of 23? I just feel like I would speak about it differently, right? If I had really changed my tune, which in some parts, he has absolutely changed his tune. In other parts, kind of weird.
which started to be a lot. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started like every 4 hours a night, and then it moved every 2 hours a night, and then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you.
So then she eventually just starts sleeping in there, which again creates other issues and is in line with what other people said about Jody and how she deals with her patients or partners. Jody and Ruby have already been sentenced though, right? Yeah, but it's just 1 to 15 years. They go to parole board. More on that later, and we'll hear what Ruby's perspective is and what the people in prison are telling her how that works. Joy D, question. I don't quite understand the sentence. Are they eligible for parole after 4 years and evaluated by the parole board? Is there a further sentencing hearing to drill down the sentence? So the parole board can let them know what their sentence is going to be at a later date. But again, we'll discuss this more when we listen to Ruby's jail calls at the end of the video.
That's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed, and then she started having like trances and stuff. I would say probably September, where she believed that she was going to heaven and seeing God and Jesus and talking with him. And she would get together with Pam Botcher. Ruby, Pam, and Jody would get together and do these interventions. That's what they call them. And so they just go up and lock themselves in a room for 4 or 5 hours, and then they'd come out and they'd all just be on cloud nine. And Ruby would share with me, like, she had this amazing vision, and I wrote it and recorded it all down. And we have a work to do from God, and you're part of it, and the bishop's part of it, and we're all part of bringing all this stuff to the world. And so it was, and it continued like that until I wanted to move on with life. And I would call it dragging my heels. So that was around October. And Jody flipped out because during one intervention, Chad was in the backyard with a bunch of friends. And it was my job to keep all the kids contained in the basement watching movies or playing video games. And I took the dog on a walk, and
they've got their parenting consultant there and really helping them. They're trying to work on, dealing appropriately as parents, and they shove their kids in the basement to watch movies and play video games so they don't bother the parents while they're doing God's work upstairs. Like, again, red flags. Like, these are the things that are red flags. It's wild.
I thought they were done, but they weren't done. And Chad had all his high school friends over in the backyard. Jody flipped out. She was ready to come back to Ivan's on her own that night, and Ruby and Pam talked her into staying. But that was the first night where Ruby said, I want a separation from you. And it was an in-home separation. And so it was hard. Basically, there were all these rules now placed on me. Like, I could leave when I wanted, but I couldn't come back until Ruby gave me permission. I couldn't come into the kitchen to eat until Ruby gave me permission. And the upstairs where Jody roamed was completely off limits. I couldn't go upstairs anymore in my own house. And there would be, Ruby would dictate all of the terms of how our interactions would be, when we would talk, and that was hard. And it was during that time that I really became, I would say, dependent upon Ruby. Like, if she said a kind word to me, like, my whole day was made, right? And so that,
again, that's a lot of manipulation tactic, and they build that up, and that becomes an issue. And that's how you start to understand, and you can get it when it's your wife or your mom or your dad, like how that abuse and that really works to just mess people up. And again, that's why I think I am of the opinion at this point that at least law enforcement investigating this case saw Kevin Franke as potentially another victim and not another defendant. Now, I think there are people in the chat that split both ways. But to me, it's real. I mean, John, we can throw up a poll. Do you see Kevin Franke as a victim or I don't know if I want to call him a perpetrator or liable? So victim, that's not the right word. Just put victim or defendant. What do you see him more as? Another potential defendant or a victim?
that separation continued all the way up until the holidays, maybe the last week of December, first week of January.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or put both. Victim, defendant, or both.
And then Ruby ended that separation. Jody went home like the second week of January. But by that time, like, Ruby, Pam, and Jody were completely determined to do this work that they felt God had for them. And I thought it was crazy. Like, I thought it was just batshit crazy. Like, Ruby, you have a reputation, you have a multi-million-dollar business, you have a brand, and you were just giving it away. She wanted to legally, like, work with Jody's attorney to basically give Jody 8 passengers.
And that's the point, right? It's all like, why? Why spend this much time? Why are we doing all this? Does she really believe it's real? Because, later we're going to hear from Ruby where she starts to think Jody doesn't even believe it's real. This is how she figures out that, yeah, she is playing everybody. So why? Well, when somebody has a multi-million-dollar brand and YouTube channel, that's why. When somebody else is trying to do podcasts and get their message out and be a parenting and life coach and all that stuff, that's why. That's what makes it so obvious that her motive for doing all this is so obvious.
And become an employee of Connections. So basically, the contract was Ruby gives Jody everything, and Ruby gets nothing in return. Our manager, our YouTube manager at the time, was like, red flags, red flags. Like, I don't know how to tell you she is scamming you. Ruby fired. And I was like, I believe
somebody that starts pushing back. Same thing again, the Drake Bell story from that Nickelodeon thing. His dad started pushing back, fired him, get him cut out of the picture so the perpetrator can still do what they want to do. Mandy said, I've never heard of the parole board deciding the sentencing. Is this normal? So they basically determine if they're rehabilitated, if they can get out, or if they need to wait and come back later to see if they're rehabilitated. There's a max, there's a minimum, and basically they determine whether or not somebody can get out within the sentence that the judge gave, which is allowed by statute. Nickel for a pickle. It seems Jody saw herself as a prophet. Yes, just like other offshoots of LDS. He made her sound like she was possessed. Yes, I agree with you. And there are a lot of similarities with other cases. That's for sure.
He's our manager. I think he's right. And Ruby started threatening me with another separation. And just like, this isn't about money. This is about doing God's work. So we continued in that dynamic for the next 6 or 7 months until she went on a trip with Jody and Pam down to Arizona. I think they, like, when I read her journal, she went into Mexico or something and bought drugs or something, like prescription drugs for the emergency kits. And when she came back from that trip, before she even brought the bag,
a lot of these things that they say that like just sounds normal, like went to Mexico to buy some prescription drugs for the emergency pack. It's like, what? Just seems wild. SC said, how many degrees of separation to Chad Daybell? So one of the biggest differences to me between Chad Daybell and these people are, and I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter if I mean any disrespect for this, but I don't mean any personal disrespect. It seems like Chad Daybell was a lot less successful than Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand. If you look at the type of houses they were buying and stuff they were doing and channels they were building and money they were making, their scheme and their con was, and their cult was a lot more successful than anything Chad Daybell had put together.
To the house, she pulled me in and said, I want to talk with you.
Which is why they were a lot harder to catch and get. Honestly, like I truly believe that. And we hear from, other of Jody's victims in media. And that's one of the reasons she was so hard to pin down is it basically had to be written in a journal and we had to have pictures and videos of it because when other people would say it, she had such a good reputation as a trustworthy person, trusted by the church and other people, that it was very hard to get her to pay for what she did.
And that's when she asked me to leave. And that was July 20th, 2022. So my interactions with Jody at that point became one of Jody. I was still in the men's groups, but the dynamic changed. Instead of being like one of the top people that help run groups and help support, all of a sudden I felt like I got knocked to the bottom. And Jody was just piling on me every week in the men's groups. And the other men just do whatever Jody does. If Jody piles on somebody, they all pile on. If Jody praises somebody, they all praise. And so it really felt like a pack of dogs. And Jody was the alpha.
Again, not very unusual either when you have situations like this. Steph said, are the police looking into connections like Pam? I don't think so. I haven't heard that. Especially now that everybody's pointing the finger at Jody. I think anybody else that would ever be involved in the future would also point the finger at Jody, but we'll see. Helen, both. He got too deep and didn't know how to get out, especially if he is scared for donors and being told it's good because of religion. Patty, may I say that any minor children in this case should never live with any of these adults again. This is worse than I originally thought. And Vicky said, how unusual God's work so frequently include making great sums of money for individuals. Not correct. Ain't that the truth?
And whoever she, sicked the dogs on, they would go. Whoever she praised, the dogs would just lick them up and down. And that's how these groups went. And so once I was in separation, every week was just hell, psychological hell. And Jody was running it. Everything was on Zoom. And I knew that the only way I would ever get back into my house was I had to get Jody's approval. If I didn't get Jody's approval, I would never get Ruby's approval. But it felt like an impossible task because no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to track better, be truthful and not be selfish, every week it was like you're being manipulative, you're being selfish, you're lying, you're hiding something, you're still hiding stuff, and I really started to question my sanity, honestly. After a while.
Jody that you're talking about.
Almost like some of these police interviews, like the psychological warfare. You keep telling them something enough, eventually they might start believing you or thinking that they're losing their mind because they can't remember, they can't answer the question that you feel so confident you know the answer to. Again, what this interview does, I think, is gives more credence to Ruby Franke's statements to law enforcement that Jody brainwashed her. Jody was the ringleader. Jody was the bad one. So I do think that this is absolutely this was used to help her case. Did he want to? I don't know. Chris K. Peter, if they decide to place the minor children with their older siblings, can Kevin be mandated by the court to pay child support? I don't know. I'd have to look into exactly how all that would work with custody and family law issues. So I don't have that answer off the top of my head, Chris. Sorry. Laverne, how would Ruby have done at trial on an insanity plea? I don't think it quite would have risen to the level of insanity. Maybe she could have argued that she didn't know what she was doing, or she didn't know the difference between right and wrong, or the consequences of her actions. But usually, based on what she was saying, she did know. I think she did know the consequences of her actions, that it would be hurting the kids, and maybe even I think she knew that it was abuse, but she thought she was doing it for the right reasons, which doesn't really quite connect to insanity. I don't think it would have worked. I don't think it would have worked. Ainsley. My ex brainwashed me at one point. Then I woke up. I get that it happens, unfortunately, but getting away really helps people get out of that control. And that's literally what Ruby said. And we're seeing Kevin a few months later tell a completely different story than he did in his last interview, where he was speaking highly of Jody. Mandy, if Kevin was away, does his duty change? No, not really. I mean, if a court ordered him to go away, yes. My fiance's dad left as a kid and came back when he was an adult. Does he have retroactive responsibility for anything bad that happened? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is not how it works. And again, that's probably one of the reasons why we don't have criminal negligence, right? But I think morally speaking, or did he do something wrong, or should he have been there? Should he have been a protector? Sure. But once you leave and basically abandon your kids, and I don't mean that as a word to throw shade at him, I mean legally abandon, then you do lose some of that duty. So that absolutely does come into play. Good question.
And so that continued for an entire year, but it became more and more isolated until Jody had an approved list of men that I could make phone calls to, and it was basically 3 men. But 2 of those, well, no, all 3 of those 3 men were like, we don't want to do phone calls with you anymore because you're being manipulative. And I'm like, well, who told you that? Well, Jody did. So I was completely cut off. And if I went to my church leaders, I was seeking enablement. If I went to my family, I was seeking enablement. If I went to anybody, I was seeking enablement. And so it felt like a no-win. I felt trapped. And that's where I was all the way up until the last week of July, when Jody called me one day out of the blue and just said, I don't understand why you're not getting it. You're not changing. I don't get it. So I've been asking God what to do, and God told me that you need just to have complete, what's the word they would use? Solitude with God.
Become a monk.
Yeah. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't want you to come to men's group anymore, and I don't want you to do phone calls with any of the men. I'm like, well, then who am I going to talk with? Who's going to support me? God will. You need to learn to go to God. And so I'm just like, there's nobody. You're going to be completely cut off. And she's like, no, you'll have God. So that was the last week of July, and that was my last interaction and contact with Jody. But it was strange because around that time, things with Ruby started picking up, and I didn't understand why. But Ruby wanted to meet in a parking lot and wanted me to sign over titles of documents, after the 2 of our cars.
Obviously. The money. It's all about the money. The poll results are over 50% think both. 25% think he is a defendant. 20% think he is a victim. So kind of a split room here on Kevin Franke.
Wanted me to sign them over to her name, and
Two of you.
but I was like, okay, you know, I'm just not. I'm in total compliance mode at this point. Just like, I'm a good husband. You see, you can trust me, and so whatever she asked, like, sign over the cars to me, no questions, just okay. And then another thing, she was like,
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate you too. Appreciate everybody joining and just telling me what you guys want to hear and what you want to break down, because some of this stuff is wild, right? Some of it has legal implications, some of it doesn't. The overarching theme, I think, helps Ruby and hurts Jody, which was probably calculated.
I might want to do an investment, but I will need your signature. Do you trust me enough that I could get your signature if I wanted to pursue my own investment? Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
How big of an investment? Just talking about it. She's telling you.
She never did. I never signed anything. She never brought anything to me. But when I returned to the house, everything was packed up, and a neighbor came over and said she asked for the HOA rules and mentioned to him that she wanted to rent the house out, which I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And she wanted to sell the house, but couldn't because my name is on the mortgage. And I think that's what she was talking about. Of, will you sign something if I just put it in front of you? And you know what? I probably would have. Like, that's how messed up I was.
I'm glad you didn't.
Me too. That would have been disastrous. But I can't describe to you what torture and hell it was to live it was more than a month really, in complete isolation, believing that I was like evil.
And what's also interesting is, like, so we're saying, oh, these are the telltale signs, look, of abuse, of isolation, manipulation, cult leader, whatever. We're saying all that, but he's had time. And some people have already said it. He's lawyered up. He's wised up. You know, you start to learn what, how that works and what those signs are. And you start to think back and think, you know what, that did happen to me. You know what, that did happen to me. And then maybe it starts to line up a little bit more and snowball.
I mean, manipulative and lying and selfish, and that I had abandoned my family, and that I was more interested in my selfishness than my family.
And I think moving forward, you going through that is going to be extremely helpful. I felt that way because a lot of those are the same words that were used with them, and you're going to understand how they felt. You know,
we've already talked about that
Yeah.
actually. The couple of times we've met, I said, "This is how I felt. Did you feel that way?" Like, yes, this is how I felt. Like, when we each confessed to things that we didn't do, I'm like, I confessed to things.
Again, that's a lot of what the kids were saying, and that's what he's saying, and they kind of like bond over that and talk through how they both went through that. They both had to, you know, be manipulated like this. Leslie Girl, I see Kevin as a victim similar to parent alienation. PA is a real problem. When parents split, one of the parents is a good manipulator. Yes, no. I don't know. I can't say that definitively. Nico B. Jody focused on removing the husband since she is a lesbian. It's very obvious. I don't know that she is, but I definitely think she wanted the power. She wanted the power position for people to look to her and her to be the decision maker. SL Conley, I believe this was in September of 2023. At the bottom of the screen, it's rolling. I can't remember the exact day.
Things I never did, but I was so scared. And he's like, "That's what I did too." So we connected on that level, you know. And it's crazy that anybody can get to that level of desperation, but we were there. We were there.
This is the end of July, you're saying? End of July of 2022, or the last time we saw Jody was
23.
23. Okay.
The last communication I had with Jody was the last week of July. Might have been like the first couple days of August. It
so just shortly before we made contact with you,
yeah,
or
a
you
month.
made contact with us.
A month before. So for that whole month, my life was literally wake up, exercise, go to work, pretend everything's okay, come home, do connections like workbooks and read scriptures and try to strip selfishness out of my life. Like, go to bed, wake up, repeat every day, boom, 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 boom. I mean, I was so upside down. And my plan was in 6 months, I get to reach back out to Jody again, and she'll let me back in the group, and then I can prove. Oh, I don't know if I heard a door knock, but
Might be kids.
might be. Oh,
And we can.
has it been an hour? I told you it wouldn't take an hour. I'm
and
sorry.
We're good too if you need to head out. No, seriously. We just wanted, yeah.
The only questions I have, privy enough to understand or be told what those visions were.
A couple of them.
What was it that she tell you about?
So like one of them, was walking along the beach with Jesus, and Jesus challenged her to go walk
Again, more visions and things that were probably going to end up in the pen papers that he heard.
on the water, and it was a whole lesson on walking on the water. Another, she would walk with Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, and she had a pet lion in heaven named Charles. I don't know why I never forgot that name, but it was like this massive lion, and she got to ride the lion and learned that, all about who she was and this pet lion and all. There was another one where there was a lot of satanic ones where when she would go into possession mode, she would talk in like different voices. It was really creepy, but the voices would say, "She's ours. We're not letting go. She is Satan's bride. She's mine. I'm going to marry her."
Very strange, again, to think of this person as your spiritual leader, guidance, life coach. Like, very strange.
So if she was faking it, she believed that she was trying to, or Satan wanted her as her bride.
Then you said, just clarifying, so last time you saw the kid.
Again, this is a red flag, telltale sign of manipulation. It's very unusual that something like this would ever happen. And Vicky kind of made a joke about it before. It is almost always, I mean, I know growing up, like I went to a Christian school, and there were plenty of guys that are like, God told me you were going to be my wife. It just so happened to be, the coolest, prettiest girl in school. But I was like, gosh, that's just so bad. And you just learn that from an early age as a way of manipulation. And it can really grow and spiral out of control and end up being something like this. Amanda said, as a member of the LDS Church for 35 plus years, I've never heard this kind of garbage preached or supported. These wackadoos are completely twisting things for their own benefit. And it happens to a lot of religions, not the LDS. A lot of the LDS cases happen to be in the news. So I understand why people are making those connections, but it is a religion and God, and anything that people hold strongly to, money, jobs, family, can be manipulated and used, just like again, the Nickelodeon thing where it was fame and power and money, and that was used to manipulate and abuse kids.
This is when you separated that in July of 2022. Do you have any questions for us?
No, I'm just really interested in the pen papers. Like, for my own curiosity, I want to know what was going on in all of those.
Also kind of weird. Why does he care so much about the pen papers? Like, let's get my kids, let's get these women in prison. Let me get my kids back and move on with my life. He's very interested in these pen papers.
Those little interventions.
I'll look back through the photos because, like I said, we documented everything in the home, whether we took it or if we didn't. And then I'll reach out to you, Mr. Kester, and let you know.
To have
But-
a couple of observations when you're
Yeah,
done.
go for it.
So I always thought it was interesting, now that you mentioned that she was riding a lion. Kevin told me that when they were having these group meetings, she would never show up. She would show up on the WebEx, but in place of her person would just be this X for the connection. So it's like this Wizard of Oz thing going on. And that
She
was
never
kind
showed
of-
her face.
kind of eerie.
She always covered herself.
Yeah.
Like, even in the hottest of summer, she would wear these hoodies. She would smell so bad.
Yeah.
She would never bathe. But she was trying to hide her arms and stuff because apparently Ruby told me they were just like mutilated.
So the other thing that I think
So strange. She wouldn't bathe. She hid her arms because they were mutilated. Does this seem like the powerful manipulator, wealthy person that the church is recommending? I mean, some of this stuff just doesn't track to me. Nicole, I agree. That's tough. It's a really tough thing for him to get over, I think.
it's important for them to know is during that whole time when you were out, you had communication with Ruby maybe 3 or 4 times. But each time, or at least on some of the occasions you spoke to her, she's telling you that everything's blissful, we're doing well, everything's so much better without you.
Oh, that would be communicated to me by Jody every week and the men's groups too. And it was just like, you're abandoning your family. And it always hurt so bad because it's like, I want to be with my family so bad. What do you mean I'm abandoning them? If you wanted to be with your family, you would change. You would stop being selfish. But you keep being selfish, so you want it. And it was just felt like, well, how do I stop wanting it then? It's like, you must change. Well, how do I change? Well, you got to want it. Well, what? So how do I want it? You got to change. It's just like
Perpetual cycle.
yeah, there's no, I tried to find my way into that cycle. And it felt like, you ever had a dream where there's like a problem you're trying to solve, but you can't solve it, and how frustrating you feel? That's what my life felt like. And as I'm looking back, I'm realizing there was no solution. There was, you either had Jody's approval or you didn't. I wasn't doing anything different than the other men in the group. But they got her approval, so they were praised and they were repenting and they were doing everything right. I, on the other hand, was manipulative and selfish and enabling and she became like the arbiter of truth, the arbiter of forgiveness, God's own mouthpiece, and it was just messed up.
Well, I'm glad that you're seeing.
Again, she's taking the place of any religious beliefs, basically, as the person telling you what's right, wrong, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, what the Bible does say and doesn't say. Nina said, Peter, from a father's perspective, what's your opinion of Kevin's never contacting his kids for 18 months and didn't ask about them even when they were hospitalized, lack of care or even love? I mean, unimaginable. I can't relate, can't imagine, can't think of anything that would make me do that. The only thing I can ever even try to start to imagine how I wouldn't see him or talk to him for 18 months is obviously if I was in prison and they didn't come, or number two, if there was a court order. And if I broke that court order, I would end up in prison and then not be able to see them as opposed to working through a way to get to see them again. Outside of that, literally nothing. I don't care what they did. I don't care what my wife did. I don't care what anybody did. I can't think of a single other thing that would make this happen for me. So that's why I get where a lot of people are coming from and how harshly they feel, but I also do feel bad for him because I do think he was manipulated. I do think he was brainwashed a little bit into this cult. And I think he's come to that realization now. So I do feel for him.
Clearly, you know, and
Coming out of the
came out of it.
yeah.
Yeah. So
I have
Yeah.
one last discussion. So in the home, when the warrant was issued, there was a bag with $85,000 cash in it. And I understand her lawyer, Ruby's lawyer, has all that.
I'm not.
Which home are we talking about?
Ivan,
$5,000 worth of cash that Ruby's lawyer apparently has. Interesting.
This is Ivan's home.
We
By
don't,
the way, that would not be a crazy high fee for multiple counts of felony child abuse.
no, the money was left where it was left. We didn't take it. It was secured and we left. We're assuming that Lamar Windward
Yeah,
was
he
able to
has.
retrieve it, but we don't, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
what it is.
So here's kind of the issue. That money, she cleaned out their bank accounts.
the kid's savings account.
Yes, and yours too, your joint account.
Yeah.
And that's where that money came from.
Mhm.
So I don't know if
Interesting. A lot of money talk there at the end before we finish the interview. It's like, I wonder why.
you can have, or if I need to have a discussion with the county attorney, Kevin would kind of like his kid's money back.
Yeah. So it would be civilly. So I would go address
I
that.
talked to Lamar,
Lamar,
see what those funds are being used for.
I don't think he wants to give them up. And I wouldn't either if I were
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
I think he's using it for attorney fees.
Yeah.
I don't know if the county attorney is gonna be able to separate that out, as the judge has already separated out. Even the county attorney's gonna kind of go, it's a civil, it's both your guys' money in some sense, and.
But if you
The judge
did-
has to divide that up where it goes and do that. He's a county attorney one.
If you did go civil, I like that would be your fastest route to.
It's just dirty what she did.
Yeah.
She stole money. She stole money from my 18-year-old son out there. It's wrong.
Well, the other thing that you did, that, I don't know, I mean, there's a lot there, but I think they need to know that while Jody was living in your home, she was also purportedly giving therapy to Chad, and Chad was paying her. And he's like.
At that time, we
15,
were
16.
paying her.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't until Chad moved out that part of his therapy was he needed to pay for his own therapy. So at age 17, he was paying her $900 a month to get
Down
brainwashed.
at 17?
He did.
What was he doing for work?
He worked at a lifeguard, basically.
Okay.
Lifeguard supervisor at
Yeah,
two different
just
rec centers. So it was like the majority of his check
They're
was
having
going
to
to
pay Jody for their therapy too on top of it all. I mean, it's brutal. And you can see why they pled so much evidence against them. This is what a lot of evidence against somebody looks like.
Jody.
He was paying her more than he's paying rent, wasn't he?
So 3 times as much.
That's crazy. I mean, obviously, you see her house, and what she has, she's making, there's a lot of money going around. There's a lot of money. I don't know if we can, sorry, but we'll say, I'm not sure if we know where that money came from or where it went. Like, it doesn't seem like she's had income looking past a little bit, so.
Did her book sales, were her book sales?
I can't imagine they were. Anyway, I need to get my.
Yeah, we'll
No,
definitely
you're
let you
good,
go.
You're
Thank you
good.
so much for your time. I appreciate
I
it.
want to,
All right. So that is the end of the second Kevin Franke interview. Now we are going to listen to a couple clips of the Ruby Franke jail calls that are in addition to what we had already listened to the other day. So we're not going to listen to this entire thing, but there are a couple parts of it that I find very, very interesting for our discussion here. Let me share it up here. All right. Here we go.
About this, and I think I never realized how complicated it is. I always thought you pled guilty and they tell
You guys let me know how the sound is and stuff. I'm going to boost it a little bit, but I think it's better than the last video, so it should be good.
you how long you're in.
Yeah, there's a lot of terminology to know.
Yeah, and and half of the stuff that is said goes over my head, and then I have to go. I come back and I ask the girls here. I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? But
It's actually not unusual at all. She's talking about how something will happen in court and she'll come back and ask all the other girls in the jail or the prison, what does this mean? How does this work? How did it work in your case?
probation could look like going home. Like you could go home. Sometimes, it might look like going home with restrictions. Like you can go home, but
Like house arrest, it could.
you need to live with somebody who's responsible, and you can't be around certain people. Like they may say you could go home if your parents agree to house you, but you can't go home to where your kids are living. It could look like something like that. Or
No contact order. That's true. Nina, there's speculation that it would help him with getting custody of the kids. That's what people are speculating, which is potentially true.
it could look like something where I have an ankle monitor, or it could look like you can go home if you pay a $10,000 fine, or maybe it could look like instead of serving the rest of your time, we'll give you some good time and you can go home in half the time. Or so I think that getting off on probation, I think looks like there's several different ways that could happen.
Oh, I see. That's good to know.
Yeah.
And is that usually after you've already served some time then?
Say that one more time.
That's after you have served some time?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know what that is going to be. I don't know if it's, one of the girls said that it would be for me 6 months, but I've also heard it could be 4 years, and some people serve several years before they ever see their probation board.
And we've seen a lot of differences about what the minimum could be, or even if she sees the probation board after 6 months, they're not going to let her out after 6 months. Are they going to suspend the sentence and let her serve some of it on house arrest? There's a million different things that could happen. So we'll have to follow along and see when the reports come out, or if they pick a specific sentence for her, like, is she going to get out in 4 years, or what's it going to look like? But there's a lot of different options, which is why I want to listen through this, because they're talking about some experiences they've had and what's happened to them, released on house arrest with an ankle monitor, with somebody watching over you or something, which again, would not seem like enough punishment with the details and information we know now.
So I'm really still, I could be in there 4 years. I could be in there 30. Like, I really don't know.
Yeah. And that will come in February?
On February 20th.
Okay.
Yeah. And the news that I saw today, Jody's sentence hearing is also February 20th. So I'm going to make a request that we be transferred in 2 different vans. I don't think they're going to accommodate that.
Oh, do they? Okay, I see.
Yeah, when I went to the courthouse last week, what they do, they did this when they transported me to Utah County as well. They pull all the girls. There's only 2 housing here for girls. There's not very many girls here, but there's many for the men. And so they take the girls and they put them in a cell together, in a holding cell to wait, and then they get all the men together and they put all the men in the cells, and then they start putting on the ankle bracelets and the chains and the everything on the men while you're sitting in the cell with these women.
And again, now she's just kind of explaining the transport process and how she doesn't want to be sitting in with Jody.
And then they take
How
you out.
far away is your place from the courthouse there in St. George?
We
30.
listened to parts of this yesterday, but there's also some new stuff that we didn't listen to that I wanted to listen to again. So there may be some crossover. We're only going to listen to about 5-6 more minutes of these jail calls, because we did listen to a lot of this the other day.
40 minutes.
Okay.
And then you sit in a
We did
cell
not listen to these specific parts, by the way.
at the court. So if someone's hearing's at 9, this is what happened to me. There was a girl that went with me, and her hearing was at 9, but mine wasn't until 11. So she went in and she had like a 5-minute hearing. And then we sat in the cell and talked for 2 hours until it was my turn. And then we rode back together. So you pretty much spend several hours together, whoever's going to the court that day with you.
Interesting. So that means on February 20th, it would be you and her going together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When was the last time you talked to her? Was it that day?
It was when we were arrested.
Yeah, so the last day she talked to Jody was when they were arrested. Deb N said, would the kids have a say in Kevin getting custody? So they would have some kind of a say. They don't get to make the ultimate decision, but the court should, at their age, take into account what they say. Channeling the heart, Barbara. Jody would be charged with practicing therapy without a license. You need a license in addition to degrees. Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I left early in the morning to go to a dentist appointment with Julie. We left at like 3 in the morning, and she called me sometime in the morning, and so I went back down. But when I got to the house, I mean, it looked like the movies. There was a red fire truck
Yeah, this we heard. Let me jump ahead a little.
with the police, and then once the kids were taken in the ambulance cars, then the detective came and patted me down and arrested me, and then took me to the courthouse for questioning, which I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't say anything, because Lamar was really helpful. Like, if you ever get arrested, don't.
Lamar is her lawyer, by the way. Now she's going to give some legal advice.
Because Lamar was really helpful. Like, if you ever get arrested, don't say anything. I just didn't say anything. And she
How
was like,
did you find Lamar?
Really interesting for somebody that ended up pleading guilty, but she thinks it was a great decision not to say anything. I would agree with her. It is usually the right decision, but it was just kind of interesting to hear her say that, knowing she's pleading guilty. She's already pled guilty and just waiting for sentencing. But she's giving advice. Make sure you do this if you ever get arrested, just in case, sis.
Was he just assigned to you coincidentally, or did you?
so she has an attorney that she's used for connections, and I called him and no one answered, but then she called him and he said, I only do like business law. I don't do criminal law, but here's a number of 2 people who do that I would highly recommend. And so she gave the 2 numbers, and I got the number from Kevin. I don't know how the numbers got from.
So Jody basically helped Ruby get her lawyer that she loves and trusts so much. And later she says she keeps repeating the fact that he is so great. He believed her. He was so patient with her. He's so great. But it also seems like he did a pretty good job of being honest with her, because we're going to jump ahead now to a little conversation between her and her lawyer that she recounts here on the phone. And you can just imagine, because we've all kind of thought this, and we've all thought, like, what would we do if we were her lawyer? Why is he, or how is he dealing with this? He can't possibly believe that what she's saying is correct and true.
See it. But when I realized, so she had, her attorney's name is Doug Terry, and mine's Lamar. And Lamar, maybe a month into it, he's maybe not even that long, he's like, Jody denies everything. She denies having anything to do with this. And I was shocked.
Jody denies everything, right? So Jody was there, Ruby was there. They both know they did this. They think the world doesn't understand, and they think they did it the right way, right? That's what we talked about last video. Is like, Ruby's like, nobody's going to understand me. I was doing this to help my kids. Jody's like, we didn't do this. They did that to themselves. And we were like, wouldn't that let you know that obviously they were playing you? And basically Ruby confirms it now.
I was like, what? And I'm still telling Lamar, like, all of the justifications and all of this, I'm talking like a criminal. I sound like a mad person. He was so patient with me. He would just look at me and like kind of dumbfounded, like I said, 2 + 2 is 7, and I really believed it. And he would just stare at me. I'm like,
so Lamar would look at her like, and after she would explain something, he'd be like, do you actually believe that? And we've had to do that with clients too. It's like, let's record what you're saying and play it back and listen to it together, and tell me if you actually believe that and you think that that's real or true.
What am I saying that's so off? And but that's because I really believed it. But then when I heard that Jody was not talking like that, she was denying the whole thing, it told me she knew all along. It's like a little kid who doesn't know it's wrong to pee in their underwear. Like, they don't know. They're not embarrassed by it. It's like, oh, I was supposed to pee in the toilet. Oh, oops. But you get a 6-year-old. You get a 6-year-old who knows they're supposed to pee in the toilet, and they're peeing down the heater vent. They're going to try to hide it.
It's a weird analogy, but also true. It's like Jody knew exactly what she was doing. She knew it was wrong. She was trying to deny it. Ruby knew it was wrong, I think, but thought people wouldn't understand, and she was doing it for the right reasons. So that's very telling to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized she knew all along, and she's hiding it. And then I was like, crap, what am I done? And that's when things kind of started turning. I was like, she's not been honest. I didn't know she wasn't honest. I didn't know she would lie. And it's like, what else has she been lying about? Where else have I been deceived?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was that?
Oh, no, I was just, agreeing.
Yeah.
You did see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just like the little string that started pulling apart this fabric. I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, what? I can talk about it now. Yeah, go ahead.
Lamar was just very, very kind that day that we met with him. It was very kind and just visit with us.
Oh, like miraculous.
Yeah.
And they even talk more about how much they really love Lamar and are appreciative of everything that he did. So again, lawyer doing his job, doing what he should do, being patient with his client, but also having hard conversations like, do you really believe what you're saying? Okay, I've got to run. We're just over an hour. I like to try to keep it to an hour. I've got to get to my next appointment. I appreciate you guys so much for joining me. Please make sure you hit that like button. There's 5,000 of you in here. Maybe we can get to 5,000 likes again, just cause, not because we're going to do another one on this. If more comes out on this that you guys want me to break down, you know where to find me. Twitter and Instagram, where you've been sending all these clips and all these things that we've been breaking down for days. In about 5 minutes, my dad and I did a video we recorded this morning on the P. Diddy raid by federal agents. Why Homeland Security? What charges could be coming? Do we get any indication of where they are in the investigation based on them doing this raid? My dad was a former federal prosecutor, so he's got a lot to add to the conversation. It is really, really interesting to me. And I just basically ask a ton of questions for like 30 minutes. So make sure you guys stick around for that. It's going to be premiering in about 5 minutes. I'll try to be in the chat if I can a little bit later. But that's all we've got for this one. I appreciate you guys so much. Until next time, I am out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.